Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Houston, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I would like to welcome you all to Great Falls Forum. The Forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of business, public policy, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This year marks the 26th season of Great Falls Forum. We thank you for your support and ensuring the program's continued success. Today's program is also streaming live via Zoom and Facebook, and a recording will be available on the library's YouTube page. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. Please mark your calendars for our next Great Falls Forum on May 16th with Christy Gardner, Executive Director and founder of Mission Working Dogs. At the conclusion of today's program, there will be an opportunity for audience questions. Those in the room are welcome to raise their hands. Those joining us virtually can enter their questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom or comment on Facebook, and we'll read those to our speakers. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's featured speakers, Jackie Majerus and Linus Unah. An award-winning journalist and teacher, Jackie Majerus co-founded the educational nonprofit Youth Journalism International in 1994. Based in Auburn, Maine, Youth Journalism International has students around the globe. Jackie guides her students as they tackle serious societal issues such as teen suicide, school violence, pandemics, war, terrorism, and sexual assault. She also works with students writing about popular culture, entertainment, and everyday teenage life. Under Jackie's leadership, Youth Journalism International provides a platform for youth voices from many nations and every continent. Rich in diversity, Youth Journalism International focuses on journalism while building bridges across cultures and helping students grow into thoughtful world citizens. Linus Unah is a journalist, producer, and documentary filmmaker with a passion for crafting powerful stories that foster a deep appreciation for wildlife and the environment. His work has been featured on prominent media platforms, including Mongabay, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, National Public Radio, the Los Angeles Times, and Debex, among others. As the former West Africa representative for WildAid, an international wildlife conservation nonprofit, Linus led campaigns aimed at reducing demand for illegal wildlife products and promoting local support for conservation efforts. He brings his wealth of experience to Wild Africa Fund, where he is excited to continue advancing the organization's mission across Africa. He's a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, where he co-directed the short documentary Split Jury for his master's thesis. For his undergraduate years, he covered Nigeria's social and political issues for Youth Journalism International. Please join me in welcoming Jackie and Linus to Lewiston.
Well, thank you so much, Joey, and thanks everyone for being here. This is wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Jackie, as Joey said, and I am the co-founder of Youth Journalism International. How's my sound? Good? Can you hear me? Okay, great. I am so pleased to be here because there is really nothing I enjoy talking about more than Youth Journalism International. It's been 30 years since we founded this organization. My co-founder is Steve Collins here, running a tripod in the front row. But I'm lucky enough to get to tell you the stories today. Youth Journalism International, founded in 1994. Okay. Youth Journalism International is an educational nonprofit organization based right here in Lewiston, Auburn community, but we have students all over the world. Our mission is to teach journalism, of course, and that is what we started doing right from the get-go. But something we didn't expect that sort of grew organically and is really cool is that Youth Journalism International helps build bridges between people that have different cultures, different races, different religions, different nationalities, different points of view. And it is a real peacemaking engine. And I'm very proud of that work that we do, in addition to doing some really excellent journalism. As you heard, our students really do tackle some really serious subjects. It's much more than the light fare that lots of teen publications are typically offer to young people or have young people do it. Our students use their real names. They are taught ethics. They learn about how to write a story, how to source their material, and they delve into things that really matter to them. One of the things that we learned right away about teenagers is they're not fluffy. They care deeply. They're smart, and they really care about what is happening in their world. They care about their families, their friends, their schools. They care about the planet. They really care. And when things happen in our communities and our culture that are detrimental, violent, upsetting, disastrous, they care about those. Those things impact them too. And in some ways, quite a bit more deeply than they impact older people who are kind of, well, we're kind of used to shrugging some things off and kind of going along, but it impacts them really powerfully. So as you might guess, every single student has their own unique story because they're unique people. Well, I want to sort of focus on one student in particular as an example of many students. This is an outstanding young woman named Aruj Khalid. She came to YJI when she was 14 years old. She lived in Lahore, Pakistan, and in fact, that is still her home. And she was 14, and she was so full of hope and ambition and excitement. So she got a press card. This is such a big moment when a student gets a press card. I send them in the mail to young people all over the globe, and they're always very excited to get them. And that's her on the left there, holding up a certificate that she won in our contest for a photo essay she did. She brought her friend Amber into the organization, and that's the two of them with their press cards on the lower right. They were so proud, and they sent me this picture of the two of them with their press cards. You probably won't guess what's on the upper right. That is a YJI button, which you can have if you go to our table over there, but it's also next to it, that's a little cake of soap that Aruj made when she was bored in chemistry class one day. She made it out of coconut oil, and she wanted to make it, pattern it after the logo. And she took a picture of it and sent it to me. You never know what outlet that these kids are going to take to show you their excitement and their enthusiasm. And that was the first and so far the only time that anyone has made YJI soap. But it was, I thought it was adorable. So Aruj was talking with me one day, but this was back before we used Zoom, so it was probably over Messenger or maybe it was over email. And she was telling me about this girl she knew who was 12 years old, and she couldn't go to school. She wasn't allowed to go to school. She only had to work. She had to be a maid in someone's house. And Aruj was understandably and righteously upset about this. She was pretty outraged that this kid was not getting any education. Aruj, fortunately, was lucky enough to be in a family that sent their daughters to school. Well, one daughter, she was the only daughter, but the hardest working one. And she was very upset about this girl that she knew that couldn't go to school. And I said, well, why don't you write a story about it? Why don't you interview her? Why don't you talk to her and get some pictures and write a story about it? She wrote a great story. We ended up publishing it, and then it was chosen to be the best news story of the year in our annual contest. And so she got a trophy, and that just kind of surged forward. She also got some recognition back home in Pakistan for that too. And that was great. So Aruj got involved with the Malala Fund, and she was invited to be one of 25 young women from the entire world. So narrow that down, 25 women in the whole world who were doing inspiring things with girls' education. And I think I might have gotten ahead of myself, but a little foreshadowing there. Aruj ends up with the Malala Fund, and she got to write a chapter in their book about Dare to Dream, the power of an educated girl. So this picture shows Aruj and her friend Amber, Aruj is on the right and Amber's on the left. And the two in the middle, what happens when somebody gets all fired up about being about reporting and writing and their work gets published on the website, other young people in that same area somehow manage to see it and they get all excited and then we have this little cluster. And we had this little cluster of bright, brilliant young women from Lahore, Pakistan, of all places. And they didn't know each other. Just the two on the ends knew each other. And the rest of them, they didn't have any connection. But they got together online and they said, let's meet up and let's take pictures. And they did this adorable thing where I didn't ask them to do this. They don't need me to tell them what to do. They're so smart. And anyway, they wrote these words, encouraging, productive, liberating, and innovative. And they put them on little signs and they held them up for their photo shoot. So Aruj got picked to come to the United States and spend a semester at Michigan State University. She arrived in Washington, D.C. in 2018, and they took some of these kids around to show them some of our beautiful monuments. And she went to the World War II monument, and if you've ever seen it, you know that it's got these gigantic pillars and every state has its own thing. She made a beeline for the state of Maine's pillar and made sure that she had a picture of herself pointing out to Maine so that she could send it to me. And sure enough, we got her to come to Maine for a weekend, a whirlwind, joyful time. That was the first time we met her in person. And it was just so much fun. She met lots of other YJI people, spoke in a classroom, just got to know people. And by this point, she was involved with the Malala Fund. And that's a picture of Aruj on the right and Mukta Guram, a student from Connecticut, on the left. And they're in our office in Auburn. And they hit it off quite well. So you won't be surprised at this point to hear that she won a Fulbright scholarship and she's studying at Harvard. In summer of 2022, she was part of our, what is now an annual global conference. And that was in Istanbul. And in that lower left picture, that's Aruj, and she is speaking to all the students at the conference. And she didn't know them when she arrived, and they didn't know her. And they just automatically went to her like a magnetic force. She's bright, she's fun, she's sweet, and she had a great story to tell. And she told everyone her story and they were riveted. This is what happened. She is now on our board of directors, and that's a partial photo of the board of directors on the right. And then the picture at the top is her presenting at a high school journalism conference in Boston. She still makes time even though she's in an aggressive program. Her program with Fulbright is supposed to be a 2-year thing at Harvard, but Fulbright is making her do it in 1 year. So it's a lot, but she still made time to speak at that event and come to Maine, and she'll probably be here again soon. So is she a shining single star? No. YJI is filled with incredible young people. You're going to hear from one of them really soon, Linus. Soon your pain will be relieved and I will be sitting down and Linus will talk. But these guys are all at an event we had in Washington, D.C. We had 3 young women speaking, and it was Aruj from Pakistan and Frida from Iran and Tanya from Ukraine. And they all had stories of their personal quest for freedom in their countries. And those are 3 very different countries. So they have different experiences. But there were some other alums that showed up to help out. And Mirwais Kakar is on the far left, and he is from Afghanistan. And then there's Tanya Takshenko from Ukraine and Aruj. And next to Aruj is Liat Malesa from Virginia and Bailey Krulowitz from Connecticut. And that's Emily Cooch, originally from England, now living in DC, being a resident expert on Russia and Ukraine. I believe she's working for the Freedom House right now. And they're all staggeringly bright and inspirational, and also really good human beings. A fun feature on our website, I have to plug the website, youthjournalism.org, is a map. And this is a map kind of frozen, and it shows where all of the stories that students have done over the years, in our 30 years, where have we had stories? If you go to the website yourself, you can zoom in on any of these little dots and it will start to spread out, and you zoom in far enough and you'll be able to see exactly what the stories are and click on them and read them if you want. But I love to show this because we have actually published from all 7 continents, even Antarctica, really. So these are a collection of photos. This is Mehran in the top right, working on a story in Toronto. And Dawit is taking some notes, interviewing a young woman in Lewiston. He's from Ethiopia and he was visiting Maine. They come, they just come. Up on the upper left is Alan Burkholder interviewing Senator Chris Murphy. And the kids in the center are working together on a piece about a museum in New York City. Rachel Glagowski was waving our flag at the Beijing's Great Wall of China. And Karen Ellison from the Netherlands is in France during a snowstorm showing off her t-shirt. I don't know why, she must have been very cold, but there she was. And kind of a precursor to what we have now, which is a global conference, we had this little get together in Toronto. We brought 3 girls from the US, met up with 3 girls who were living in Canada, and they had this little mini afternoon of fun. And that was sort of like just a little taste of what was to come. These are more students now. You will recognize when he gets up here and his handsome self, Linus will be talking with you. But Linus is in the top left picture, second from the left. And Linus, very much like Aruj, got started, well, he got started a little bit later in his life. He was already in university in Nuska. But as soon as Linus dove in and started writing, and he's really good, he dove in and started writing, and then it seemed like all of his classmates at the communications school in Nuska wanted to be part of YJI too. So pretty soon, because of Linus's leadership, we had this nice collection of young people in Nuska, at the University of Nigeria in Nuska, and they got together and took a picture. I might have badgered him to get that picture, I'm not sure. But they were pretty excited to get their stuff in the mail too. I know it's not easy to get there, but Linus made it happen. In the lower left, that's Anjola Fashaway, and she's from London, and she is a current student and a rising star. Watch for her work, she's fabulous. And then we have Parni and Shasavari in the upper right. She lives in Tehran, not an easy place to be a journalist, not an easy place to be a young woman. But she is very proudly showing off her YJI shirt in Tehran. She did get to come and meet us at a conference in Istanbul, and she said it was the first time she'd ever felt the sun on her shoulders or the wind in her hair. And it's not because her parents are restrictive, they're really lovely. They came with her. You would just love Parni, and I have to stop talking about her now. I cry. That's Kaylee Willis with the alligators in Louisiana. And then who could resist? What journalist could resist the Edinburgh Press Club? Coffee shop now, used to be where the reporters hung out. Very good. I highly recommend the delights there. This was in 2016, and we had students from the US, the UK, and from Poland who got together. They were studying in the UK, and they came together, and another little precursor to our global conferences. Well, they come to Maine. They love Maine. And that's Dawit from Ethiopia, stretching his arms at the top of Cadillac Mountain. And that's Mugda and Aruj at Portland Headlight. And Aruj fell so deeply in love with Portland Headlight that she has to go there every time she comes to Maine. She just loves it, which what's not to love. And the lower left, that's Beth Criado Band, who came during the Moxie Festival in Lisbon. And she entered the recipe contest. She took her mom's recipe for shortbread. She called it millionaire shortbread because it has sort of a chocolate topping. But Beth ingeniously somehow mixed it with Moxie because Moxie had to be in the recipe. She won second place. And that was the point of pride for a girl from Scotland. And in Bar Harbor there on the lower right is Ganesha Balakrishnan from Singapore and Owen Ferguson from Scotland and Aja Koder from Poland. And we managed to arrange it so that all of their visits coincided and they were all in Maine together. And up there in the upper right is our beautiful Charlie Wallace Martell, who's back there. She was greeting you probably when you came in today, or she might have. She is a brand new student at YJI, and one of our youngest and newest students, and she's already doing great things. She, at that moment, was at Bates College covering a Ukrainian egg decorating workshop. And that was really fun. We both went to that. And she wrote a really terrific story about it. And it's on the website. Everything's on the website. So getting back to the serious work that we do, not that Ukrainian egg decorating isn't serious, it is, but it's not it doesn't have the gravitas of mental health impact of a pandemic. So during the pandemic, we started meeting on Zoom like everyone else. And kids all around the world were talking about how lonely they were and how hard it was to be a student and be away from their teachers and their families. Welcome. And they decided they wanted to do a project on mental health and the impact that the pandemic was having. So together, a big group of them interviewed about 60 young people all around the world. They got interviews from kids everywhere about this, and they talked to them about all these different aspects of their lives and the impact the pandemic was having. And they also interviewed mental health experts, and they came to a pretty startling, but a pretty solid conclusion that the pandemic was doing a number on youth mental health everywhere. And their project, which was really good and is also on the website, COVID Mood is called. That project was a full year ahead of the US Surgeon General coming out with the announcement that, guess what, the pandemic was pretty bad for kids' mental health. The next year, some of the same students and some new ones decided to team together and work on a project on sexual assault and the trauma that comes with it. Please do not be alarmed by this photograph. It is staged. There were 21 students from 5 continents working together on this project. They interviewed 13 survivors. We had one of our alums was reading the project, and just as we published it in stages, and we were just about to wrap it up, and she said, you know, I have my own story to tell, and I'd really like to be part of this. So she ended up being sort of an epilogue. It was very powerful, very, very powerful. And I really recommend you reading No One is Safe. It's also on the website. One of the most common questions I get is, where do you find these amazing young people? Well, first of all, the world is filled with amazing young people. I have to shout out to the young people. Our world is going to be in very good hands. I promise you that. But we find them because they find us. They find us, they apply to be students at YJI at a rate of 1 or 2 per day. When we can absorb about 80 students a year, a lot of people get left out. And that is the only thing I'm going to say today that's really very sad. We just don't have the capacity to bring in as many people as would apply. And so I tell them when they do get in, you're really lucky, but you deserve to be here, but just like students who get into Bates College, they're lucky. They deserve to be there, but other students couldn't get in because it's a small college and they can't admit everyone that gets accepted. So that's that story. So a quick thing about our contest. One of our trophies is on that table over there. We have been doing this contest for 15 years and people all over the world enter it. Lots and lots of American high school students enter their work. It's open to anyone that's 19 and under. And so we've had winners everywhere. So it's not just YJI students. really impressive group of judges handles all the judging. And we partner with the First Amendment Museum. Shout out to them. They were great. If you haven't been to see them, they're in Augusta. Really good stuff there. They sponsor a First Amendment award. This is where all the trophies have gone over the years. So they really do get spread out over the world too. We love maps. A quick aside about our global conferences. We had the first one in 2022 in Istanbul. The one word I would use to describe it was magical. It was so great to have these kids meet each other in person, to explore this fabulous city of Istanbul together, to exchange about each other's cultures and families and what their schools are like and everything about their regular lives and their countries. And we had special speakers. The girl from Iran was there, and she talked about what it's like there. And Tanya from Ukraine was talking about what it's like in her country. And Aruj, of course, Aruj was talking. And they wrote lots and lots of things about the places that they visited and the experiences that they had. And the takeaway that I wasn't really expecting from these conferences, and the next year was in Prague, and we had the same situation, was the confidence building that happens in these conferences. I mean, I know that in a general sense, YJI is really good for young people and their confidence. It gives them lots of advantages come from learning about journalism. But one of the things that comes out of these conferences, it's their first time on a plane, or it's their first time without their family, or it's their first time spending a week with people they don't know, or it's just walking up a mountain that they've never done before. You can't even imagine what the next one is going to say, but it's terrific. And that is not something we expected, but now we expect it. And we're going to Mexico City this summer, and I'm fully expecting that there's going to be, I mean, I think they all get a little confidence boost, but some of them just change. They just change because they believe in themselves. And after the last conference, I had a girl who was so timid when she first got there. And as she was leaving, she said she was going back to pick up some award at school. And she said she didn't really even care about it anymore because now, she said, now I have YJI and I know I can do things. And that's the kind of thing they say. And it just changes their lives. It really does. So locally, we've gotten involved here at the library. The center top photo is Gilbert Bwete from Uganda. He is like a son to us. It comes to visit sometimes. And he got stuck here during the pandemic, couldn't leave. And he came into the library. This was not during the pandemic because we didn't have programs like this during the pandemic. But he did do a little program in the children's department about photography because Gilbert's a fantastic photographer. And he had all the kids make their own little paper cameras and showed them how they would frame shots and things like that. And we also showed a movie one year called Documented. And for our 25th anniversary, we staged a production of the Bill of Rights. Neely Bruce, a composer at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, wrote it, and he let us use it. He came up here to conduct it. Senator King was here giving a very clever tutorial on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights using a Vegematic and a hazmat suit. And you can see the whole thing. It's all on our website, a recording of it. And the music is beautiful. And we had singers. Carlos is at the lectern in that lower right picture. He was our youngest singer. I think he might have been 16 then. I'm not sure. And Esther Tucker on the top picture on the right side with the composer was our oldest singer. And that we had singers from Maine and instrumentalists from Maine, and it was really quite a celebration. And last spring, Liat Malese from Virginia came here as a guest speaker at the Justice for Women event and got to cover this wonderful journalist speaker named Patricia Campos Melo. She's from Brazil, and she's done some incredible work. And Liat got to meet her and write about that. Sometimes we take our show on the road. Another thing people like to know is, where do you get the money for this? Because we don't charge students ever. We've never charged a student to participate. And I know that if we did, we would not get some of the high quality young people that we do. And it's easy for kids with money to find opportunities. Well, sometimes it is. Usually it is. It's easier if you have money. Everything's easier if you have money. But if you don't have money and you find a program like this and you don't have to pay to be part of it, it's pretty special. So where does the money come from? Well, first of all, individual donors have been the rock foundation of of the whole program for many, many years. We couldn't do it. We couldn't exist without them. And then we've got some family foundations that have been really generous supporting our programs. And we have received some grants and raised a little bit of money here and there, little fundraisers. And I would like to add that part of the reason that we're able to do this on very little money is because there's very little overhead. Everyone's a volunteer and no one is paid. So this may have to change because the sustainability is not going to be there as we keep growing. But for right now, it keeps the costs low. If you want to believe someone other than me, go to greatnonprofits.org and look up Youth Journalism International. There's 230 positive reviews there, mostly from students, but also from parents, grandparents, alumni, and professionals in the field. And some of our donors have left reviews explaining why they think this is a valuable program. How can you help? If you have the means to donate, that really helps. If your employer matches, that's great. If you give to United Way, you can earmark it for Youth Journalism International if you want to. Invite us to come and speak to a group that you're part of. Follow us on social media. Read what the kids write and tell your friends about it. Tell your friends, tell everybody how great it is, because if you start reading it, you're going to be like, wow. And you'll see Charlie's story about egg decorating. You'll see Linus's work, which is now in the past, but you can say it's incredible. And I got to tell you a little quick story about Linus before it's his turn. Linus, when he was working with us, had a T9 phone. Remember those? When you were texting, you had to tap the numbers. If you wanted the letter C, you had to tap the number 1 3 times. Remember that? He wrote stories on those phones. He wrote stories on those phones. He was so determined to be published and to do journalism that he wrote his stories on a T9 phone. He didn't have a laptop and he didn't have a smartphone or anything like that. And that's the kind of grit and determination that some of our students show. And since then, he can tell you about his journey and what his experience was like in YJI, but he's an impressive guy. And I picked him up yesterday. He traveled from Nigeria to come here, and we coordinated it so that he could be a speaker here today. And he's just great. And I hope that you will give him your welcome. Please come, Linus. And
great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jackie, for that really kind introduction. I think, yeah, really excited to be here. It's so lovely to meet all of you. It's a pleasure as well. And thank you for the opportunity as well to share my story. But I think why this story matters is that beyond everything that Jackie has talked about or described, perhaps my personal story will help illustrate the impact that YJI is having, not just in the US, but across the world generally. So I would start, I'm here to tell you a very short story. I hope that sort of illustrates why this organization is important, not to me personally, but to a lot of other people across the world. 12 years ago, I don't know why, yeah. So I grew up I was born in central Nigeria, grew up reading a lot of newspapers because my mom reads a lot of them. So we'll get deliveries every morning. And I did read the Sun Journal this morning as well. So, well, it's a tradition I grew up with. And I think also the backstory there is that in Nigeria, I think a lot of people, I mean, it has changed, I think, in the past decade, but a lot of people grew up wanting to be journalists because when we had like a lot of military dictatorships, if there was one group of people that were fearless, that could write editorials that can take on dictators, it was journalists and writers. They were fearless. I mean, newspapers were raised down. It didn't deter people from like writing about what they cared about. And so for a lot of young people my age, we grew up reading a lot of newspapers and we're inspired by like all of the great writers we read, from Chinua Achebe to Wole Soyinka, who was the first African to win a Nobel Prize for literature. And so there's that whole culture and tradition. And eventually, I think when I wanted to go to university in 2011, I was torn between being either a journalist or a novelist. I just didn't know which one to go to do. And I think eventually I settled for journalism because then it could take 10 years to write a novel, but you can write stories like a lot. You can write a lot more stories like in a week or even a month. And decided to go to the University of Nigeria, which is quite big for us back home. It's one of like the top 10 universities there, but has a tradition of first school of journalism as well in West Africa, and has a tradition of producing really great journalists in the country. I got to the University of Nigeria in 2012, and yeah, I mean, I was taught the principles of news writing, all the theories of communication, like how to write a story. But I mean, one key thing that was missing was we never got to write actual stories. I mean, people, pretty much everybody in the class can reel off all of the news values, what you need to have in a news story, how to interview people, but never actually get to do the interviews. And I think, yeah, 1 year in and in my sophomore year, I think what was missing was that inability to like do what I was taught. It's not as hands-on as like the kind of education you get in the United States, for example, except you end up going to like really expensive private schools. But the public ones, I think, yeah, they will teach you everything you need to know, but sometimes like putting that into practice is what is missing. Yeah, I usually would go to the library as often as I can to read, fortunately, like a lot of American textbooks also that tell you about news writing. But again, the challenge is I read all these and I never write any stories. And so, yeah, I was really desperate to find like a platform where I could write. We've got national newspapers, but sometimes you don't even know how to get in touch with the editors. And one day I remember like one hot, humid afternoon. It's always humid, by the way. Yeah, in 2013, just remember like desperately looking for like an outlet where I can write. And then I bumped into Journalism International on Facebook and sort of looked up the website. It sounded really exciting, all of the stories I was reading. And I think what fascinated me was the fact that it wasn't just stories from the US, it was stories from Pakistan. I mean, countries that had sort of like similar stories like Nigeria, where I come from. And yeah, I remember like reaching out like on Facebook and like doing an email. And like a couple of hours later, I think Jackie wrote back on Facebook and said, "We've never had anybody from Nigeria." I'm like, that's really happening pretty fast. When I reached out, I had no expectations. I'm like, this is too big. Probably I'm not qualified enough to be here. But yeah, Jackie reached out, and coincidentally at that point as well, we went on strike. I mean, university lecturers in Nigeria tend to go on strike quite often because sometimes they're underpaid and they want more money. And so yeah, I got into journalism at that point in 2013. Was home because like university professors were striking. And I remember at this point, it's my sophomore year, I've been taught a lot about news writing. And then, I mean, when I got on board, Jackie like did the whole onboarding. I got to meet Steve and a lot of other students. And then I told Jackie, I said, I'm really excited to join, but I don't think I have any stories to write at this point because we're on strike. Like, probably when I get back to campus, I'd look for stories, but at the moment I'm home and I can't find any stories around. And Jackie replies like, the fact that you're home is a big story. And that was really surprising to me, I think, for me, because at that point I could tell you off the top of my head what makes a good story, but probably didn't have a news for that at that point. And then there was that whole huddle of like, it's easier to talk to your friends about journalism and like all that, but when it comes to really showing up and saying, I'm a reporter, I've got a notebook, I want to interview you, that was also like very difficult. And I mean, I got all the coaching I needed. There was like a quick guide. It's like, how do you interview people? What kind of questions do you ask? What ethical considerations should you take into place when you're doing something like this? And I mean, I went out and started talking to my friends and like people around where I lived is like, how do you feel to be home when, I mean, people in private schools are like going to school? Um, yeah, I got all that, sent in the first draft, got all the correction and editing I needed for that. And I just remember how I just couldn't sleep when the story was published. I was practically like reaching out to everybody, my family members, my friend. I'm like saying, I'm up here. And I was really excited because it taught me more than I'd learned in college for like 2 years at that point. I mean, I had that practical example of how to do a story, how to interview people, and I just didn't want to stop at that point. It was, I felt like there was that possibility, opportunity to do stories every day if it was possible. And that was the story, I think, yeah, went on to produced like a lot more stories out of Nigeria, and gradually it's like other people sort of saw what was happening, and I mean, before you knew it, we were like a team of 6 people taking on different stories. And I really remember one, I mean, in my third year university, once like some students were like kidnapped in Nigeria, and some at some point as well, like this insurgent group called Boko Haram attacked Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And I had like my finals that day in the afternoon, and this was happening in the morning. And about more than 280 girls were kidnapped. And yeah, reached out to Jackie about that, and she's like, "This is horrific. Like, would you want to do a story about that?" And I talked to Festus, who was my colleague then in school, and honestly, we forgot that we had finals in the afternoon and went out to the street, like talking to kids and all of that. I think we returned like an hour before the exams and but we were really excited to like talk to people. I mean, that went on and on. I think one big thing that I wanted to point out was that it's just how much I got out of the program. I mean, so much that it meant much to me than like what I was doing in the university, because I got a lot out of it. There was the mentorship, there was the corrections, there was the editing, there was showing you what makes a good story, and that really mattered. And also the confidence, because sometimes you need that to head out and talk to just about anybody without really caring who they are. I mean, what mattered was the story. And I mean, yeah, that went on and on. And upon graduation, I think, I mean, while we're doing all of this in college, what mattered was just to be published, to learn how to write, to receive feedback, to become a better journalist and a better writer, for sure. I mean, what like lay ahead didn't really matter at that point, but we just consumed about like sort of producing and producing as much as possible, but also getting that big opportunity to be able to tell stories that mattered in our country and like help other people to like understand it from our perspectives. And I think upon graduation, and I was telling Jackie that yesterday, I think yeah, it could be slightly difficult sometimes when you graduate to even get a job, because sometimes people don't have bylines, like they haven't written any stories at all. And what publishers wanted to see, or like editors, is like, what have you written? It's not like your college degree. But it was really easy, not only for myself, but for like a lot of like the other members of the group to land jobs. I remember the first time fresh out of school, wrote to an editor at The Guardian in the UK, which is quite big, like back home for us, and said, like, I want to write stories for you out of Nigeria, but I don't know if you would even take my stories. I'm just like sort of graduating from college in like 2 months. And yeah, I've read some of the work you do, and I think there's this interesting story about maternal mortality that I want to write about. And the editor wrote back and said, actually, I looked up your name and like went to YJ and saw the story you wrote about the elections in Nigeria, and I really loved the lead. And that was how I got my first commission to write a story, which was quite big because I had like a lot of people who have been in the industry and haven't had that sort of opportunity. But I mean, the work I've done for YJ at that point was what opened many doors, and not just with the Guardian, but with Al Jazeera, and that um, really continued and like gave me the zeal, the determination to be an independent journalist and not be sort of affiliated to like newsrooms, because it's a bit complicated when you get in there. Some of the big newsrooms are like owned by politicians, and so it sort of shapes the kind of stories you write. But I mean, being independent allowed me to take on different kind of stories. And I mean, Nigeria is not as big as the US. It's well, similar federal system of government with the president and about 36 states. And I think my dream at that point was to travel to like the whole 36 states. And I mean, today I would say after 2 years down the line, I was able to go to like 34 out of that 36, writing different kinds of stories for different publications. And that wouldn't be possible without YGI. And that's why I'm here. It's really close to my heart because it gave me everything I needed. If YGI was not in the picture and all I had was my college degree, I'm not sure I'd be where I am today. Yeah, everything I needed to be where I am today, from the training, like the mentorship, and even teaching me what makes a story, because that sometimes that looks very easy, but you would realize, especially as an adult now working with scientists like who work in conservation, sometimes distilling like what makes the story can be difficult. It's a bit easier if you're in communications or you're a journalist, because then you've got the nose for news. But when you work with some scientists, you can, yeah, you see the struggle. It's like, it's so complex that the public cannot understand and make sense of what you're saying. But I mean, for journalists, it could be a little easier. And all of that is down to like the kind of training and mentorship I received. And yeah, I went on from like doing a lot of freelance work. At some point in my life, winning like the Future Award for journalists, which is quite big in Africa. It's like this competition that awards like young people across the continent that do different kind of things, from like movies to like journalism to sciences and all of that. I won that in 2018, and part of it is down to the work I've done with YJI, and then a couple of other stories out there. And yeah, went on from being a journalist to also trying to like do more for my country, and yeah, our wildlife and our forests, and like ended up working for like a conservation organization. Eventually, after COVID, decided to go to University of California, Berkeley, and Jackie was kind enough to write like a recommendation. I think the best recommendation I've ever seen, I think I would say, because sort of it was really personal. Talked about yeah, even I remember I didn't tell them, but at some point I really wanted to get this photo from my hometown where I was born. And it's really small rural town, so you don't have like skyscrapers or anything. But I just wanted to have this landscape aerial photo that gave people an idea of what it looked like, and I had to climb a tree to do that. Uh, and yeah, that also made it into my recommendation. And I remember the people at Berkeley saying, once we read that, I mean, we just knew we had to get you here. And yeah, so yeah, I mean, YJ is huge, big part of my story. I don't know how else to like talk about all of the great things they've done for me. And for a lot of other young people across the world, I think whether myself and I look back to all the members of the team in Nigeria, I mean, they're all doing really well. From Festus to Chetachi to Ifeanyi, I mean, all are working in great places, telling good stories, or using their skills to like, help people understand, make more impact, whether it's about like public procurement or explaining like very complex things to the public. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what more young people are doing, and I do know how much difference it can make in the lives of people. And it's, yeah, really great that you don't get to charge a fee. I mean, because with that, sometimes it's sort of, some people cannot afford that, and that's why they need all the support and help they can get. To be able to like reach out to more people, get more people on board, and tell global stories that matter. I think big organizations like the New York Times and all of that will have correspondents, but who the storyteller is matters really well. When you grow up in a place, you've lived there and you've got that lived experience, you bring all of that to the storytelling, and that does matter. And that is, I think, one big gap that YJI is closing, one that many big newsrooms cannot bring to the public, because, I mean, pretty much everybody that writes here lives in the countries they write about, and they know the country better than anyone else, and have lived in this country and have seen it, especially for developing countries, seen it like, go through leaves and bounds and like grow and like face different challenges. And all of that experience is what people bring to storytelling. And yeah, I hope Journalism International would outlive all of us, and yeah, would continue providing opportunities to like young people across the world and bringing all of these amazing stories to the public. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
And we do have a couple of minutes
Yeah.
here for questions. If anybody in the audience has a question, go ahead and raise your hand and I will bring you a microphone. We're going to do a little musical mic situation up here, and I'm going to do something with the computer. But anybody has a question? Okay, I'll be right over.
Hi, first of all, I have to say, I really admire what you do, really, truly, deeply admire what you do. But
Thanks.
I also think about what you do quite a bit because violence against journalists is rising around the world. We see that in Gaza and Ukraine, and your journalists are not near you. How do you work with them in violent situations or when they're reporting on violence in their home countries where, you know, they could be victimized through that?
Right. Well, first of all, we do have students in some of the most dangerous places in the world, including a new student in Myanmar right now, and Ukraine and other places. The first rule is your life and your safety is worth more than any story or any picture. So hands down, safety first, which is not necessarily what a professional would choose, but they're kids. So that's my first rule. The second thing is they know their country better than I do. And their parents know their country better than I do. I can sit back here and worry about them, which I do, but I urge them to be cautious. Sometimes you just can't, it's just not worth the risk. We had a girl in Russia. She's not Russian, but she lives in Russia, and she's from the Caucasus region. And she wrote about that terrorist attack on the concert venue in Moscow. And we worked carefully with her. It was her first piece too, which didn't help, but she was very nervous. And she was very concerned about how things were going to be phrased. We don't want to have anything, we're not going to print something that's not true. But we went back and forth a lot on how we were going to describe things. I mean, as you might know, it's against the law in Russia to say that there's a war in Ukraine. So and for her, she was very sensitive about it. And so I followed her lead on that because she knows what the repercussions could be much more than I do. And she's old enough to know that. And sometimes if they're younger, I ask them, talk to your parents and see what they think about, you know, you going to this place, or you should go with someone else, or maybe not go there. Maybe just talk to people in other places. It's really hard from a far distance but everyone's always been safe, but it's something that we worry about. And in terms of Iran, for instance, nothing. They could do nothing right now. It's just too awful. And I don't want to put anybody at risk of imprisonment or worse. So sometimes, well, the girl in Myanmar so far has just done cultural things. So that's a way to get your name out there and your pictures and she wrote about cave exploration, and she's got a few more pieces coming out about different cultural things, but she's not writing about kids getting snatched off the street. And that's hard. As journalists, we want to tell those really important stories, but also I don't ever push them because that's their life. That's the best I can answer that.
Any other questions?
Great question though, Judy.
Thank you very much for this presentation. My question is for Linus. You have written several stories. Could you tell us about one or two that you may be particularly proud of and why?
Maybe repeat the question.
Yeah, okay.
Because I don't think the mic was on.
Okay. One or two quick stories that I was proud of and why. Quite a lot of stories, but I think the one that would be at the top of the list would be like a collaboration we did as a team. One year after more than 280 girls were kidnapped in northeastern Nigeria. It was a very big story, and one that like pretty much all the big international media covered. And 1 year afterwards, still the girls were still, I mean, in hiding, like the terrorists kept them in hiding. They still weren't returned back to their homes. And I think, yeah, 1 year after that incident happened, we sort of like as a team worked with Jackie and Steve to sort of like write something on the anniversary. And it was a combination of like talking to people, but also writing about how we felt, like from our personal perspectives. How does it feel? I mean, for me, down in southeastern Nigeria, it was safe to go to school, was safe for like my cousins to go to school and all of that. And I mean, not fear, like there was no fear of being abducted or something, but for people living like in northeastern Nigeria, that was a very difficult time at that point, 2014, 2015. People were getting kidnapped and it wasn't too safe. And it was a story I think I sort of returned to after writing that I remember like going back to read it quite often because it captures two sides of the entire thing. It was when I was talking to young women who weren't like in this location, but how it felt to like know that their peers elsewhere cannot, go to school safely without that fear of being abducted. And then the other part was how we felt as young Nigerians watching all of that unfold. The second part would be a story about, I mean, Jackie and Steve get us to do these stories about like our hometowns, which is quite interesting because sometimes you live in a place, you just never step back to look at it. Like, I mean, when you look at things as a writer, as a journalist, it forces you to pay attention because details matter. When I remember, I mean, getting that prompt to do a story about my hometown where I was born, and it was a very peaceful, quiet, remote rural town. Didn't have like a lot of people, probably about like 20, 30,000 people. A lot of them are farmers and business people with small stores. And when I sort of left to go to southeastern Nigeria to study, there was like a little ethnic sort of conflict that sort of tore apart the cordial relationship that existed between people there. And things became like a little fragile. People who were friends, yeah, it got really complicated at that point. And all of that happened when I was away. And when I had the opportunity to write about that, I just remember going back to this town and like, having that opportunity to like not talk to people, but just sort of silently wait through street from street and like explore different parts of it. And like sort of like in a meditative way, sort of like think about all of what has happened, the conflict and what it's done to people there, and like what it's done to me as well, and how I just couldn't wait to leave. But that was not, and it speaks very broadly to even like what is currently happening in Nigeria today. There's like a lot of religious intolerance. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. I went to like a Catholic primary school, and you would find both Christians and Muslims there. And I could say, yeah, people they went to church with us, and on Fridays, I mean, I could went into the mosque as well. It's like it was just so peaceful, and all of that was ruined by like the incident that happened. And it's a story that I mean I got to write about like few months after all of that happened, and one that I still get. I read it, I think, at some point last year again.
Oh.
Whenever I just sort of remember like growing up there, those two stories stand out for me amongst like every other story they've written.
All right, and with that, we have run out of time for this afternoon's Great Falls Forum, but thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Jackie and Linus.
Yeah, I wish to get. Thank you.